Captain Jake Morrison sat in his cramped ship quarters, staring at the holographic contract floating in front of him. 20 years. 20 years of hunting down the galaxy's worst monsters, and this was supposed to be his last job. The payment flashing at the bottom of the screen made his eyes widen. 3 million credits. Enough to buy that quiet ranch on New Montana he'd been dreaming about since the war ended. The targets file loaded slowly on his outdated system. Draken. A Dragon-class bioweapon. One of the last survivors from the Cinder Wars. Jake's jaw tightened as he read through the sparse details. 15 meters long. Scales harder than titanium. Plasma breath that could melt through starship hulls. Responsible for destroying 3 colony vessels during the war's final days. Jake had seen a lot of terrible things in his career, but colony ships were different. Those weren't military targets. Those were families. Children. People just trying to escape the war and find somewhere safe to start over. The thought made his stomach turn. He accepted the contract with a heavy swipe of his hand. The hologram dissolved, and a new message appeared. His employers, a corporation called Nexus Holdings, provided coordinates to a forgotten moon called Dust's End. The mining colony had been abandoned for 15 years, ever since the Cinder Wars scorched half the settlements in the outer territories. Jake powered up his ship's engines and set course. The journey would take 3 days through empty space. 3 days to prepare himself mentally for what came next. He'd retired his military rank 5 years ago, but the instincts never left. Check your gear. Run diagnostics. Stay sharp. Stay alive. As the stars streaked past his viewport, Jake couldn't shake a nagging feeling in his gut. Something about this contract felt wrong. He'd worked with dozens of corporations over the years, tracking down rogue AI, escaped prisoners, and war criminals who thought they could hide in the dark corners of space. But Nexus Holdings was different. They'd provided barely any intelligence. No behavioral patterns. No recent sightings. Just coordinates and a target designation. He pulled up what little information existed about Dragon-class bioweapons in the public databases. The files were heavily redacted. Most of what he found were propaganda pieces from the war. The hegemony had created them as living weapons. Genetically engineered creatures with near-human intelligence, designed to serve as one-man assault forces. Or one-dragon assault forces, technically. Jake remembered seeing them in combat once, years ago. He'd been a young lieutenant back then, watching from a bunker as a dragon tore through enemy fortifications like they were paper. The creature had been magnificent and terrifying. It moved with purpose, with intelligence. Not like an animal at all. That memory stuck with him as his ship approached Dust's End. The moon appeared on his scanners as a gray, lifeless rock. No atmosphere worth breathing. No active power signatures. Just ruins and radiation shadows from old weapons that should never have been invented. Jake suited up in his combat gear. The armor was old but reliable, covered in scorch marks and dents from 2 decades of fieldwork. He checked his rifle twice, loaded with armor-piercing rounds specifically designed for heavy targets. His helmet's heads-up display flickered to life, showing thermal imaging and targeting assistance. The landing was rough. Dust's End didn't have functioning landing pads anymore, just flat stretches of vitrified sand where the ground had been superheated into glass. Jake's boots crunched against the surface as he stepped out into the thin atmosphere. His suit's life support kicked in immediately. The colony stretched out before him like a graveyard. Twisted metal structures reached toward the dark sky like skeletal fingers. Blast craters dotted the landscape. Entire buildings had been reduced to slag. This place had seen hell, and hell had won. Jake activated his thermal scanner. It took a moment to filter through the background radiation, but then he found it. A massive heat signature in the central complex, right where the old water treatment facility used to be. His target. He moved carefully through the ruins, rifle raised, every sense on high alert. The complex loomed ahead, its entrance a gaping darkness. Jake switched on his helmet lamp and stepped inside. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing corridors choked with debris and dust. The heat signature was getting stronger. He was close now. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline sharpening his focus. 20 years of experience told him to stay calm, stay ready. But that nagging feeling in his gut grew stronger with every step. Something about this whole situation didn't add up. Why would a dragon hide here, of all places? Why hadn't anyone else found it? And why did Nexus Holdings care so much about secrecy? Jake turned a corner and froze. His helmet lamp illuminated something massive ahead in the darkness. Scales. Claws. The unmistakable shape of a dragon curled in the shadows. This was it. The moment of truth. His finger moved to his rifle's trigger. And then he heard something that changed everything. The dragon was crying. Jake stood frozen in the doorway, his rifle trained on the massive creature before him. But something was completely wrong with this picture. The dragon wasn't prowling. Wasn't preparing to attack. Wasn't doing any of the things a dangerous bioweapon should be doing. Draken was curled up on the cold metal floor like a wounded animal, his enormous body trembling. And the sound coming from him was unmistakable. He was sobbing. Deep, shuddering sobs that echoed through the empty facility. Tears streamed down his scaled face, each drop hitting the floor and instantly turning to steam with a soft hissing sound. Jake had seen a lot of strange things in 20 years of hunting across the galaxy. He'd seen criminals beg for mercy. He'd seen prisoners break down when cornered. But he'd never seen anything like this. This creature, this supposed monster responsible for killing thousands, was crying in the dark like his heart was broken. His training screamed at him to pull the trigger. Every military instinct told him this could be a trap. Dragons were intelligent. They could think, plan, deceive. Maybe this was just an act to lower his guard. His finger tightened on the trigger, the targeting laser painting a red dot right between the dragon's eyes. But Jake hesitated. Something about this felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then Draken spoke, and Jake's world tilted sideways. Please. The voice was deep and resonant, but it cracked with emotion. Perfect English, with an accent Jake couldn't quite place. If you're here to kill me, just make it quick. I'm so tired. I'm so tired of remembering everything. Jake's mind raced. The files hadn't mentioned that dragons could talk. They described them as weapons, as tools, as programmable killing machines. Nobody had said anything about them being fully sentient, capable of speech, capable of this kind of raw emotional pain. Don't move, Jake said, keeping his rifle steady even as doubt gnawed at him. I'm not here to chat. I'm here to complete a contract. Draken didn't move. He didn't even lift his head. He just kept crying, his massive shoulders shaking. I know. Everyone who comes here comes for the same reason. I've been waiting. I deserve it. I deserve worse than death for what I did. Jake's finger stayed on the trigger, but he didn't fire. What you did? You mean the colony ships? The 3 transports full of refugees? The dragon let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Yes. Among other things. I remember every face. Every child. Every person who burned because of me. I see them when I close my eyes. I see them when I'm awake. They never leave me alone. There was something in his voice that Jake recognized. He'd heard it before in the voices of soldiers coming back from brutal campaigns. Guilt. Real, crushing, unbearable guilt. The kind that ate you alive from the inside. You sound pretty sorry for a mass murderer, Jake said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. Draken finally lifted his head, and Jake got his first clear look at the dragon's face. His eyes were ancient and exhausted, filled with a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. Sorry doesn't begin to cover it. Sorry is a word for when you accidentally hurt someone. There's no word for what I feel. No word for what I carry. Jake's tactical mind was screaming at him that this was getting too personal, too complicated. He should just complete the mission and leave. But something made him ask the next question. Then why did you do it? Why attack civilian ships? The dragon's eyes closed, and fresh tears streamed down his face. I didn't choose to. That's what nobody understands. Nobody asks. They just see the monster who burned their families and they want revenge. And I understand that. I want revenge too. I want revenge against the ones who made me do it. What are you talking about? Jake took a step closer, rifle still raised but his curiosity overriding his caution. The neural collar, Draken said, his voice barely above a whisper. They put it at the base of our skulls when they created us. Do you know what it's like to be a passenger in your own body? To scream inside your mind while your body follows orders you'd never choose to obey? Jake felt his stomach drop. He'd heard rumors about neural collars during the war. Compliance technology that the hegemony had experimented with. But using them on sentient creatures, on beings capable of thought and feeling? That was a war crime of the highest order. You're saying you were forced? Controlled? Every single action, Draken said, opening his eyes to meet Jake's gaze directly. When I burned those colony ships, I was screaming inside. Begging my body to stop. But the collar activated and I couldn't resist. My body moved. My throat opened. And the fire came. I felt everything. I understood everything. I just couldn't stop. Jake lowered his rifle slightly, his mind reeling. But the war ended years ago. Why are you still here? Because where else would I go? Draken's voice rose with anguish. They hunted us all down after the war. The dragons. They called us war criminals. Put us on trial for following orders we couldn't refuse. They executed my brothers and sisters one by one. I watched them die for crimes they were enslaved to commit. So you hid here, Jake said slowly, pieces falling into place. At the sight of your worst act. I came here to die, Draken admitted. I thought if I surrounded myself with the ghosts of everyone I killed, maybe I'd finally have the courage to end it myself. But I'm a coward. I couldn't do it. So I waited. I knew eventually someone would come. Someone like you. Jake stood in silence, his rifle hanging loose in his grip. His entire worldview was shifting. He'd accepted this contract thinking he was hunting a monster. A creature that had chosen evil. But if what Draken said was true, then this wasn't a monster at all. This was a victim. A slave who'd been forced to commit atrocities and then blamed for them. And Jake had been sent here to make sure the truth never came out. Show me, Jake said suddenly. Show me your neck. Show me the scar where they put the collar. Draken slowly turned his massive head, exposing the base of his skull. Even in the dim light from Jake's helmet lamp, the scar tissue was obvious. A brutal ring of damaged scales where something had been surgically implanted and later removed. Jake stepped closer, examining it with his helmet's magnification. It was real. The scarring pattern matched what he'd seen in classified medical files about neural interface technology. His mind raced through the implications. If Draken was telling the truth, then Nexus Holdings hadn't hired him to eliminate a threat. They'd hired him to bury evidence. Evidence that could implicate corporations, military officials, maybe entire governments in war crimes. Jake Morrison had spent 20 years hunting criminals. He'd built his reputation on completing contracts, no questions asked. But he'd also built that reputation on one core principle: he went after people who deserved it. And this dragon didn't deserve execution. He deserved justice. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He lowered his rifle completely and took off his helmet. I'm not going to kill you, he said. But I need you to tell me everything. Every detail about the collar program, about what they did to you and the others. Draken stared at him with disbelief. Why? What difference does it make? Because, Jake said grimly, if someone sent me here to cover up war crimes, then we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to expose them. Jake sat down on a chunk of broken concrete, his rifle resting beside him. This was against every rule in the book. You don't sit down with your target. You don't make yourself vulnerable. You don't listen to their sob stories. But something told him this was different. This mattered in a way that went beyond contracts and credits. Draken watched him warily, as if expecting this to be some kind of trick. You really want to know? Most humans just want me dead. They don't care about the why or how. I'm not most humans, Jake said. And if I'm going to throw away a 3 million credit payday and probably get myself killed in the process, I want to know exactly what I'm fighting for. So talk. Start from the beginning. The dragon took a shuddering breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of suppressed pain. We weren't born. That's the first thing you need to understand. Dragons don't exist in nature. We were made in laboratories by hegemony scientists. Genetic experiments combining reptilian DNA with enhanced neural structures. They wanted living weapons that could think tactically but would never question orders. Jake listened intently, his recorder active in his helmet. If they were going to expose this, they'd need evidence. Testimony. Hard facts. There were 43 of us in the first generation, Draken continued. They grew us in acceleration tanks. Taught us language, strategy, combat techniques while we were still developing. By the time we reached physical maturity, we had the bodies of apex predators and the minds of trained soldiers. We could speak 5 languages. We understood orbital mechanics, supply chain logistics, battlefield tactics. We were perfect weapons. Except you could think for yourselves, Jake said quietly. Exactly. And that terrified them. Draken's claws scraped against the metal floor. We asked questions. Why are we fighting? Who decided these people are enemies? What happens when the war ends? The scientists hadn't planned for that. They'd made us too smart, too aware. So they brought in the neural collar program. Jake felt his jaw tighten. Tell me how it worked. They installed the hardware at the base of our skulls while we were sedated. When we woke up, We thought it was just a communication device. They told us it would help coordinate our missions. We trusted them. We were stupid enough to trust them. Draken's voice cracked. The first time they activated it, I was in a briefing room. The commander gave an order, and suddenly my body wasn't mine anymore. I stood up, walked to the wall, and punched it until my hand bled. I was screaming inside my head, but my body just kept following the command. They wanted to demonstrate their control. They succeeded. Jake had seen a lot of horrible things in his career, but this was up there with the worst. Taking a sentient being and turning them into a remote-controlled puppet. It was beyond cruel. From that day forward, every mission was like that, Draken said. They'd activate the collar, give the orders, and we'd carry them out. No choice. No free will. Just helpless passengers in our own bodies. And the worst part? We stayed fully conscious. We felt everything. We understood everything. We just couldn't stop. The colony ships, Jake prompted gently. What happened? Draken closed his eyes, and Jake could see the pain etched in every line of his face. It was the final month of the war. The hegemony was losing badly. They were desperate for any advantage. Intelligence reported that 3 transport ships were evacuating civilians from the contested zones. Command decided those ships couldn't be allowed to reach independent space. Too many witnesses. Too many people who could testify about what the hegemony had done. Jake felt sick. He'd suspected the war had dirty secrets, but this was worse than he'd imagined. They loaded me and 2 others onto a fast attack craft, Draken continued, his voice hollow. Sent us to intercept. When we got close enough, they activated the collars. I remember seeing the ships on my tactical display. I remember my sensors showing me the heat signatures inside. Thousands of them. Families huddled together. Children in the civilian sections. I could see everything so clearly. And you couldn't stop, Jake said. I tried. I swear I tried. Tears flowed freely down Draken's face again. I fought against the collar with everything I had. I felt like my brain was tearing itself apart. But the collar was stronger. My body moved into position. My throat opened. And the fire came. The silence that followed was heavy with grief. Jake waited, giving Draken time. The first ship's hull breached in seconds, the dragon whispered. Plasma fire melted through the corridors. I could hear the screaming on the emergency channels. People calling for help. Parents trying to protect their children. And I couldn't stop. The collar kept me burning, burning, burning until there was nothing left but debris. Jake's hands clenched into fists. He'd seen combat footage of colony ship attacks during the war. The aftermath was always the worst part. Bodies floating in space. Twisted metal. The silence after the screaming stopped. The second and third ships tried to run, Draken continued. They fired their engines, trying to reach jump distance. But we were faster. We hunted them down like prey. I remember one captain on the emergency channel begging us to stop. Telling us there were children aboard. Offering to surrender. My body didn't even slow down. How did you break free? Jake asked. We didn't. Not then. The collars stayed active until the war ended. When the hegemony fell, the command structure collapsed. Someone finally deactivated the neural network. Suddenly, after years of being puppets, we had control of our bodies again. Draken's laugh was bitter. Freedom. That's what everyone called it. But it wasn't freedom. It was just a different kind of prison. Because they blamed you for what you'd been forced to do. The new government needed scapegoats, Draken said. The humans who'd actually given the orders, the scientists who'd created us, the officials who'd approved the collar program, they all had lawyers and political connections. But us? We were easy targets. Living weapons that had committed atrocities. Never mind that we'd been slaves. Never mind that we'd had no choice. We looked like monsters, so we were treated like monsters. Jake thought about all the propaganda he'd seen during and after the war. The dragons were always portrayed as mindless beasts, as dangerous creatures that needed to be put down. Nobody had ever mentioned the collars. Nobody had ever talked about them being victims. They held trials, Draken said. Fast ones. Military tribunals with predetermined outcomes. My brothers and sisters were convicted one by one. War crimes. Crimes against humanity. They were executed in public, broadcasted across every network. The galaxy cheered. But you escaped. 3 of us managed to run before they caught us. We went into hiding in the outer territories. I heard that one was caught last year on a mining asteroid. They killed her on sight. No trial that time. The other, I don't know. Maybe he's still out there somewhere, hiding like I was. Or maybe he's dead too. Jake stood up and paced, his mind processing everything. This wasn't just a story about one dragon's suffering. This was evidence of systematic war crimes at the highest levels. And Nexus Holdings had sent him here to make sure this evidence died in the dark. You said you've been collecting data, Jake said. What exactly do you have? Draken gestured toward a corner of the facility where old computer equipment was still powered by a failing generator. I spent 5 years breaking into old hegemony servers before they were decommissioned. Medical files showing the collar installations. Communication logs with orders for specific missions. Financial records showing which corporations funded the Dragon program. Testimony from scientists who felt guilty and wanted someone to know the truth. Jake walked over and examined the setup. It was crude but functional. Draken had built himself a data archive, a complete case file proving everything he'd said. Why didn't you release this? Jake asked. Because I'm a coward, Draken said simply. I was afraid. If I released it, they'd hunt me down for sure. At least in hiding, I had a chance to keep breathing. Even if every breath hurt. Jake turned to face the dragon. Well, that's about to change. We're going to release everything. Every file, every document, every piece of evidence. And we're going to make sure the whole galaxy knows what really happened. They'll kill us both, Draken said. Probably, Jake agreed. But I've spent 20 years hunting criminals. I'm not about to let the biggest criminals of all get away with it just because they are powerful. Are you with me? For the first time since Jake had entered the facility, something like hope flickered in Draken's ancient eyes. Yes. Yes, I'm with you. Jake pulled out his communication device and stared at it for a long moment. Protocol said he should contact Nexus Holdings to report mission status. But Protocol was about to go straight out the airlock. He activated the encrypted channel. The holographic face of his handler appeared, a middle-aged woman with cold eyes and an expression that suggested she'd done this kind of work for far too long. Morrison. Status report. I've located the target, Jake said carefully, watching her reaction. Excellent. Elimination confirmed. That's the thing, Jake said, keeping his voice level. I've got some questions about this contract. The intelligence you provided was incomplete. You didn't mention the target was sentient, capable of speech, and possibly a victim of war crimes rather than a perpetrator. The handler's expression didn't change, but Jake caught the slight narrowing of her eyes. Your contract is for elimination, Morrison. Not investigation. Complete the mission and return for payment. I need more information about the neural collar program, Jake pressed. Specifically, whether Nexus Holdings has any connection to hegemony bioweapon development during the war. There was a long pause. When the handler spoke again, her voice had gone flat and dangerous. You're overthinking this, Captain. The target is a war criminal responsible for thousands of deaths. Your personal feelings are irrelevant. Complete the mission within the next 6 hours or the contract is void. And if I refuse? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Then you become a liability. And we handle liabilities permanently. You have 6 hours, Morrison. Don't make this complicated. The transmission cut off abruptly. Jake stood there in the darkness, the weight of the choice before him settling on his shoulders. He could complete the mission. Kill Draken, collect his 3 million credits, and retire to that ranch he'd been dreaming about. Nobody would ever know the truth. Life would go on. Or he could throw it all away for a dragon he'd met less than an hour ago. He turned to look at Draken, who was watching him with those ancient, tired eyes. They want you dead within 6 hours. After that, they're coming for both of us. Then shoot me and save yourself, Draken said quietly. You don't owe me anything. You have a life to get back to. I'm just a remnant of a war that should have stayed buried. Jake holstered his weapon and shook his head. You know what my father used to tell me? He was a veteran too, fought in the border conflicts back in the day. He said the measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when nobody would ever know the difference. Wise man, Draken said. Yeah, he was. He also said that sometimes you have to choose between doing what's easy and doing what's right. And those two things are almost never the same. Jake started pacing again, his mind racing through options and scenarios. I've spent 20 years tracking down people who hurt others and then hid behind excuses. Politicians who ordered massacres and claimed they were following policy. Corporations that poisoned planets and blamed it on accidents. War criminals who said they were just following orders. I am a war criminal, Draken said. I killed thousands of people. No, Jake said firmly. The people who put that collar on you are the criminals. You were a weapon. A tool. You don't prosecute a gun for murder. You prosecute the person who pulled the trigger. And in your case, the ones pulling the trigger were sitting safe in command centers while you suffered. Draken was silent for a moment, then asked, why does this matter so much to you? You could walk away. Nobody would blame you. Jake stopped pacing and met the dragon's gaze directly. Because if I execute you to cover up their crimes, then I'm no different from them. I become the weapon. I become the thing I've spent my whole career fighting against. And I can't do that. I won't do that. Even if it costs you everything. Especially then, Jake said. Look, I'm human. We're not the strongest species in the galaxy. We're not the smartest. We don't have natural weapons or armor. But you know what we do have? We have the ability to choose. Even when every logical calculation says to take the easy path, we can choose to do the hard thing because it's the right thing. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us worth something. Draken's eyes glistened with fresh tears, but this time they seemed different. Not tears of despair, but something else. Something that might have been hope. Jake activated his helmet's recording systems and began transferring all of Draken's data files into his ship's mainframe. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to copy everything you've collected. Every document, every file, every piece of evidence. Then we're going to distribute it through every channel I have access to. They'll block it, Draken said. Nexus Holdings has connections everywhere. They'll suppress the information before it spreads. That's why we're not just sending it to news networks, Jake said with a grim smile. We're going to be smarter than that. I've got contacts in rival corporations who would love to take down Nexus Holdings. I know independent journalists who can't be bought. I've got friends in the military who hate cover-ups more than they hate dragons. We're going to flood the zone with so much information from so many directions that they can't possibly stop it all. He worked quickly, setting up encrypted data packets with deadman switches. If anything happened to him or Draken, the information would automatically release to dozens of pre-programmed destinations. He sent copies to data havens in independent space, to activist groups, to historical archives, even to some pirates he'd dealt with over the years who owed him favors. We're also going to need testimony, Jake continued. You said there were scientists who felt guilty. Do you have their contact information? Draken nodded. Some of them. A few reached out to me over the years. They wanted to apologize but were too afraid to go public. Time to find their courage, Jake said. And what about the other dragon? The one you think might still be alive? His name was Krath. Last I heard, he was hiding somewhere in the Deneb sector. But that was 2 years ago. Jake pulled up star charts on his display. If he's still alive, we need to find him. Multiple testimonies are harder to dismiss than one. And if we can prove there's a pattern of victims, it makes the case even stronger. His communication device chimed. A text message from Nexus Holdings. A simple countdown timer. 5 hours and 43 minutes remaining. They're serious about this, Jake said. Once that timer hits 0, they're sending a kill team. Probably multiple teams. And they won't be solo operators like me. They'll send specialists. Heavy weapons. Orbital support if necessary. Then we need to move fast, Draken said, standing up for the first time. His full size was impressive, scales gleaming even in the dim light. My ship is hidden in a canyon about 3 kilometers from here. It's old and barely functional, but it still flies. Good. We'll use both ships. Harder to track 2 targets than 1. Jake finished the last data transfer and grabbed his gear. But first, we need to set up one more thing. Insurance. He pulled out a signal beacon and attached it to Draken's data archive. I'm broadcasting the location of this archive on an open frequency. Anyone who's listening will know it's here. If Nexus Holdings tries to destroy it, they'll have to do it publicly. That'll raise questions they don't want asked. Draken watched him work with something approaching admiration. You've done this before. Turned against your employers. Not exactly, Jake admitted. But I've dealt with enough corrupt organizations to know how they think. They rely on secrecy and intimidation. Take those away, and they're just bullies with expensive lawyers. His scanner suddenly pinged. Multiple contacts entering orbit. They were early. They're not waiting for the deadline, Jake said, checking his display. 4 ships. Military grade. They must have figured out I wasn't going to comply. Draken moved to the entrance, peering up at the dark sky. Then we fight. Jake shook his head. No. We run. Fighting is what they expect. They've got the firepower advantage up there. But they don't know we've already copied everything. They don't know the data is already spreading across the galaxy. As long as we stay alive long enough for the information to go viral, we win. And if we don't stay alive? Jake checked his rifle one more time and smiled grimly. Then at least we made sure the truth survived us. Come on. Let's go introduce some very powerful people to consequences they thought they'd never face. The first explosion hit 300 meters from their position. Jake felt the shockwave through his boots as dust and debris rained down from the facility's ceiling. They were out of time. Move! Jake shouted, and he and Draken burst out of the facility into the open wasteland. Above them, 4 attack ships descended through the thin atmosphere, their weapon systems already hot and tracking. Jake's combat instincts kicked in immediately. He wasn't going to win a straight fight against military-grade hardware, but he didn't need to win. He just needed to survive long enough for the truth to spread. And he had one advantage those ships didn't expect: he wasn't alone. Draken, can you still fly? Jake asked, sprinting toward where his own ship was landed. Like I was made for it, the dragon replied, and despite everything, there was a hint of dark humor in his voice. He spread his massive wings, scales catching what little light filtered through the dust clouds. Another explosion, closer this time. The kill team wasn't messing around. These weren't warning shots. They were trying to erase both of them from existence. Jake slid into his ship's cockpit and fired up the engines. His screens came alive with tactical data. The 4 ships above had spread into an attack formation, boxing them in. Professional work. Military discipline. These weren't corporate security guards. These were people who knew what they were doing. His communication system crackled to life. The same cold-eyed handler from before appeared on his screen. Last chance, Morrison. Stand down and we'll make this quick. Keep running and we'll make it hurt. Jake's response was to activate every broadcast protocol he had. He opened channels on emergency frequencies, commercial networks, military bands, even old civilian radio that barely anyone used anymore. Then he hit transmit on the data packets he'd prepared. This is Captain Jake Morrison, he said, his voice going out across dozens of channels simultaneously. I'm broadcasting evidence of war crimes committed by Nexus Holdings and former hegemony officials. The Dragon-class bioweapons were enslaved through neural collars. They were forced to commit atrocities against their will. The evidence is being distributed now to multiple independent sources. You can kill me, but you can't stop the truth. He cut the transmission and punched his engines to full power. His ship lifted off just as plasma fire scorched the ground where he'd been standing. Draken was already airborne, his massive wings carrying him up with surprising speed despite their obvious age and wear. The 4 attack ships immediately split their attention. 2 stayed on Jake, 2 went after Draken. Smart tactics. Divide and conquer. Jake threw his ship into evasive maneuvers, weaving between the ruined structures of the old colony. His shields flared as weapons fire glanced off his hull. Alarms screamed in his cockpit. His ship was designed for transport and light combat, not dogfighting with military interceptors. But Jake had been flying combat missions since before some of these pilots were born. He knew every trick in the book and had invented a few new ones over the years. He used the terrain to his advantage, flying low through narrow canyons and around debris fields where the larger attack ships had trouble maneuvering. Above him, Draken was holding his own in ways that were almost beautiful to watch. The dragon twisted and rolled through the air with natural grace, avoiding missile locks and returning fire with precisely aimed bursts of plasma breath. He wasn't trying to destroy the ships, just keep them busy, keep them distracted. Jake's communication system lit up with incoming transmissions. Not from Nexus Holdings this time, but from other sources. A journalist from the Independent News Network. A military prosecutor from the War Crimes Tribunal. A data analyst from a rival corporation. The information was spreading exactly as he'd planned. Then his scanner showed something that made his blood run cold. 2 more ships entering orbit. Bigger ones. Capital-class vessels with enough firepower to level the entire moon. Jake. Draken's voice came through on their private channel. They're bringing in the heavy equipment. We can't outrun that. We don't have to outrun them, Jake replied, his mind racing. We just have to stay alive for another few minutes. The data is already viral. Every major network in independent space has copies now. They can't put this back in the box. Another missile screamed past his cockpit, close enough that he could see the serial numbers on its casing. His shields were failing. His engines were overheating. He wasn't going to last much longer. But then something unexpected happened. His scanner picked up new contacts. Ships dropping out of jump space at the system's edge. Not corporate vessels. Not military. Something else entirely. "This is the independent news ship Pioneer," a voice crackled over the emergency channel. "We're receiving Captain Morrison's broadcast and are here to document. Any hostile action against civilian witnesses will be recorded and distributed across all networks." More ships appeared. A medical frigate from the Humanitarian Relief Coalition. A small fleet of private vessels from various Outer Rim colonies. Even a couple of military ships that Jake recognized as belonging to officers who'd been critical of hegemony war crimes. The attack ships hesitated. Jake could almost hear the panicked communications between the kill team and their corporate masters. Everything had changed. This wasn't a quiet elimination anymore. This was a public incident with dozens of witnesses broadcasting live across the galaxy. One of the attack ships broke off and jumped away. Then another. The two capital ships that had been approaching suddenly changed course, retreating to a higher orbit. Nexus Holdings had just realized they'd lost. Jake brought his battered ship down in a clearing, Draken landing heavily beside him. Both of them were damaged, exhausted, but alive. And most importantly, the truth was out. Over the next hours, more ships arrived. Official investigators. Human rights organizations. Representatives from a dozen different governments. What had started as a simple execution contract had turned into the biggest scandal in recent galactic history. Jake stood beside Draken as journalists set up their equipment. The dragon looked different now. Still tired, still carrying his burden of painful memories, but somehow lighter. Like a weight had finally been lifted. "You ready for this?" Jake asked him quietly. "No," Draken admitted. "But I'm ready to try." The interviews began. Draken told his story to the cameras, his voice steady despite the emotion. He showed his scars. He described the color program in detail. He named names, provided dates, gave specific examples of orders he'd been forced to follow. And Jake stood beside him the whole time, a human who'd chosen to believe a crying dragon in the dark rather than take the easy path. Within days, the scandal exploded across civilized space. The evidence Jake had distributed proved impossible to suppress. Scientists came forward confirming the color program. Financial records showed which corporations had funded Dragon development. Communication logs revealed officials who'd given orders for civilian targets. Tribunals were convened, but this time they investigated the right people. Corporate executives found themselves on trial. Government officials resigned in disgrace. Military officers who'd ordered atrocities faced justice after years of hiding behind bureaucracy. And most importantly, the surviving dragons came out of hiding. Krath was found alive in the Deneb sector, exactly where Draken had thought. 2 others emerged from the outer territories. All of them testified. All of them showed their scars. 3 months later, Jake stood in a courtroom on the independent world of Haven Station. The interspecies court was packed with observers from across the galaxy. Draken sat beside him at the witness table, no longer a hunted criminal but a survivor seeking recognition. The lead judge, a stern woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much injustice, addressed the court. "This tribunal has reviewed all evidence regarding the Dragon-class bioweapon program. We find that the defendants, all dragons created and enslaved by the hegemony, were victims of systematic war crimes rather than perpetrators. All previous convictions are hereby overturned." The courtroom erupted in noise. Some people cheered. Others protested. But the judge's gavel came down with finality. She continued, "Furthermore, we recognize the full legal personhood of all surviving dragons and award reparations for their suffering. And we extend our gratitude to Captain Jake Morrison, whose actions exemplify the highest ideals of justice and moral courage." Jake didn't feel like he deserved gratitude. He'd just done what anyone should have done. But when he looked at Draken and saw something approaching peace in those ancient eyes, he thought maybe it had been worth it. Afterward, they stood outside the courthouse as crowds milled around them. Draken looked up at the sky, truly free for the first time in his existence. "What will you do now?" Jake asked. "Live," Draken said simply. "Maybe find a place where I can help others who were used as weapons. Teach them they're more than what they were made to be." "Sounds like a good plan." Draken turned to look at him. "And you? You gave up your retirement for this. 3 million credits gone." Jake shrugged. Yeah, but I got something better. I got to look at myself in the mirror and know I did the right thing. That's worth more than any amount of money. That's very human of you, Draken said, and this time there was warmth in his voice. Yeah, Jake agreed with a smile. I guess it is. They stood together in comfortable silence, a veteran and a dragon, both survivors of different wars, both proof that doing the right thing mattered even when it cost you everything. Because that's what being human really meant. Not being the strongest or the smartest. Not having the best weapons or the biggest ships. It meant having the courage to sit down with someone crying in the dark and ask who hurt you, instead of pulling the trigger. It meant choosing compassion over convenience, justice over profit, and truth over comfortable lies. It meant being the person you claimed to be, even when nobody was watching. Especially then. And as the sun set over Haven Station, Jake Morrison knew he'd made the right choice. The choice that mattered. The human choice.